And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another weekly review with The Robot, brought to you by the Movie Pope. And here he is, bolts and nuts akimbo, The Robot.
Can I just start off by saying that my internal calendar is on the fritz? I'm just waiting for the latest software update, and once that comes, then everything will be right as rain. Okay, we good? No more complaints about me messing up dates and stuff. Excellent. Anywho, this week the guys are dropping their review of Sinners this Friday. And since this week is Vampire Week because, well, why not? I decided to review a vampire film, and who better than the big kahuna himself, Count Dracula. He's one of the most popular characters in pop culture to be adapted to film and television, and again, I was spoiled for choice. But I decided to dive into Dracula Untold from 2014, simply because it was the one Dracula movie we haven't reviewed on this podcast. Watching it left me a bit befuddled, and I think even with a software update I still wouldn't be able to process what I just saw. But hey, I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and have an honest go at it. It's not gonna be pretty, but them's the breaks. Kinda wonder if the guys just don't give me the job of reviewing all the bad movies while they get the good ones. So, boils and ghouls, witches and warlocks, if you'll permit me, let's pry open the coffin and take a look at Dracula Untold, starring Luke Evans in the titular role. Previous Dracula films have delved briefly into his origin, and we all know the bit. He's an Eastern European warlord who's fighting the invading Turks, and he employs some pretty unsavory methods just to get the win. Now, there are some nuances to what happens, but there's usually a big tragedy that causes him to renounce God and turn to the side of darkness, thereby turning him into the vampire we see today. Might I add, the personal tragedy usually involves a Dane. They always do, and then it sets him on this eternal course to find the reincarnated version of his lost love in the modern world. And it's usually a woman with an uncanny resemblance to the dead wife. Man, can you imagine how awkward it would be if the dead wife was reincarnated in the body of a dude? Would be quite the story, I can tell you that. Anyway, Dracula's origin story is pretty conventional, since the directors are basing off the legend of the real Vlad Tepes, a medieval Transylvanian warlord who was fighting against the invading Turks. Dracula 2000 and Nosferatu approach it from a different angle, eschewing the whole medieval Transylvanian bit in favor of a cursed Judas Iscariot or a corrupt wizard/nobleman. Here, the origin story is the movie, which is decent, but when it comes to details it's nothing we haven't seen before. Coppola's Dracula covered his origin in a way shorter and more concise way, whereas here it's 60-something minutes of Luke Evans screaming like a banshee. Now, I think it's great they're focusing on his origin and how he became Dracula, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not anything new, and we all know how this story ends. When the movie starts out, Vlad is in a bit of a bind. He's fighting a losing war, and he risks losing everything, from his family to his homeland. All conventional methods have been exhausted, and it looks like he would need a miracle to pull off a win, kinda like how the Panthers beat the Miami Dolphins in Week 5. Wish the Jets could do the same thing, you know? As I was saying, Vlad gets word that there's some creature in the mountains who may be able to help his predicament, but of course, he's told not to go there because it's too dangerous. And, as we all know, anytime someone tells you not to do something, you of course do the opposite. Vlad meets up with this creature, excellently played to malicious perfection by Charles Dance, and makes the ultimate deal. He gets all the supernatural powers needed to push the Turks out of his homeland, but there's a bit of a caveat. Since he's a temporary vampire, he's gonna need to drink blood. Vlad is told to resist that urge for 3 days and he can go back to being human. You know, walking in the daylight, enjoying a porterhouse, and seeing your reflection in the mirror, those kinds of perks. Vlad tries his best, but when he's severely weakened and he drinks his wife's blood to replenish his strength, that's it. He's forever cursed to walk in the shadows as a vampire. Watching those scenes, I wonder if he seriously believed he could make the 3 days without ever drinking blood. He couldn't possibly think for a second he was gonna get away scot-free. And the master vampire just has that look on his face like, yeah, you're never going back to being human, you know, it's all mind games, really. Having lost his wife and humanity, he snaps, but not before he sends his son away to save him from the vampire horde. Oh, I forgot, he also turns his men into vampires. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but in hindsight, it was a mea culpa moment. Vlad is the good-looking, rough and ready nobleman who is the selfless paragon of virtue and patriotism. He's just a simple man who wants to save his country and then return to a life of ruling justly and firmly. But the Turks, led by Mehmet, are just downright vicious and just commit every sin in the book in their quest to conquer Transylvania. And historically, warfare back then was pretty brutal and invading armies enacted horrific tactics to force the other side to heel. I'm not denying that, but there seems to be some sort of perennial malaise where Hollywood just can't give us a complex villain. Dominic Cooper works with what he's got, and what we get is a villain who is every much as predictable as can be. He's greedy, sadistic, and power-hungry. And sure, Vlad becomes a vampire to beat his army into the ground, and vampires are pretty bad and scary, but he's only doing this to save his country. Mehmet, on the other hand, along with his army, is met with fury, paid back for all the times they burned and pillaged mercilessly. I did roll my eyes just a bit, but given that this isn't exactly Hamlet, I shouldn't put too much stock into it. Still, though, both hero and villain in the story are just copy and paste characters with reverse characteristics. If Vlad is kind and noble, then Mehmet isn't. Vlad becomes a legendary monster while the Sultan is worm food. You get the point. I know it's a pretty stupid pitch, but had they revealed Mehmet was actually a werewolf all this time, boy, that would have been quite a show. Mind you, the movie would still be atrocious, but at least they're taking it to its logical conclusion. After all, it's not like we haven't seen vampires and werewolves duking it out, you know? And it's been a minute since we last saw it on the big screen. Boy, the visual effects are pretty bad. The shots at the beginning made me laugh, quite incredulously, I might add. Whether it's the cloud of bats, blood evaporating off a sword, the weird filter they put on the piles of silver coins, you can tell whoever got put in charge of VFX was just phoning it in, almost like they were daring us to call them out on it. Watching it now in 2025, it's remarkably cheesy. And, while I admit I am a softie for rom-coms, Vlad is just way too lovey-dovey with his wife. Like, obsessed, he can't just live without her. Sure, they want to make him human, but there is such a thing as overdoing it. His emotions are just jacked to 11, man, and there's very little subtlety for the imagination. And finally, just watching this movie gave me the 300 vibes. The Turks marching into the castle and demanding tribute is a little too much on the nose. And let's not forget the whole East versus West motif, too. I get 300 was 8 years prior to Dracula Untold, but it seems like a lot of directors making an action movie were still borrowing from Zack Snyder's playbook. I guess we can be thankful the Transylvanians weren't going to war in leather thongs, but making them vampires instead wouldn't be considered an upgrade in my book. Dracula Untold gives us an origin story, showing us the man behind the monster, but honestly, it's not reinventing the wheel. Luke Evans is giving us a Dracula not too different from Gary Oldman's portrayal, except maybe for a few details. But the operative word is human, because even though he becomes a blood-sucking creature of the shadows, he's very much recognizably human, which is a pretty conservative way of telling a vampire story, let alone a Dracula movie. Now, Last Voyage of the Demeter, which we reviewed earlier this year, does give us a different type of Dracula. Not the urbane hunk who's just bursting out of his clothes in pure animal masculinity, but pure animal. Add that predator stalk and prey element to a ship out at sea and you've got gold. And I really do wish that filmmakers delving into the vampire genre would recognize that. Seriously, Twilight just had to come in with their sexy, sparkly vampires who were just misunderstood emo cryboys and completely rearranged what a vampire was meant to be. Let me just say this right now, in case my co-hosts failed to do so on Friday. Vampires aren't nice. They aren't misunderstood. They aren't noble creatures whatsoever. They view humans the same way cows are viewed. And they totally go for the whole thrill of the chase vibe because it's all about eating and prolonging their accursed life. Dracula Untold and Twilight and most modern vampire movies churned by the Hollywood machine may want to give us a sympathetic and romantic monster, but they're still monsters. Don't believe me? In Eastern Europe, there are still living traditions around burial practices to ensure the recently departed don't return as vampires, and believe you me, they don't view them the same way Hollywood would like. So yeah, chill on that next time you decide to watch another emo vampire movie. Thanks for watching, and if you don't mind, please leave us a like, it helps a lot. And while you're at it, subscribe so you never miss an episode drop. This is the Robot signing off.